Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As many of you might know, May is Asian Pacific American History Month or Heritage Month. And we're recording this episode in May, and I'm really excited tonight. We're being joined by Carolyn Brown. She is acting vice president of the Japanese American Museum in San Jose, as well as seventh grade teacher Rose Reiken, who is a teacher at High Tech High in San Diego. And the reason why both these guests are joining me is because they engaged in a great project on Japanese American history with Rose's seventh grade students. And they're going to tell us all about that. And hopefully you could pick up some ideas to form your own community partnerships. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I'll start with Carolyn. Carolyn, can you talk a little bit about what you do at the museum, how you got involved with it, and what its purpose is?
They always say that your work chooses you, you don't choose your work, is what I was taught, and I absolutely think that's true. I spent 50 years in healthcare as a nurse and a healthcare administrator, and I had not planned to get involved with the museum when I retired in 2022, but it found me. I am serving on the board of directors. I also serve as a docent at the museum and kept working in the work of the museum. It is something that I have a particular interest in. I'm a third generation Japanese American sansei, and I grew up hearing about history. My parents didn't like to talk a lot about it, as do most of the Japanese Americans of their generation don't want to talk about it. But I did learn a lot about their experience and what happened. And then throughout my youth, I had some significant things happen that showed me that discrimination and prejudice still exist. This concept of intergenerational trauma is very real. It gets passed through the generations. My grandparents came to this country from Japan. All of the children that subsequently followed were U.S. citizens. All of them were incarcerated during World War II, except for my father, who was in the U.S. Army prior to Pearl Harbor being bombed and spent the entire war in the Pacific in the top secret military intelligence service, interrogating and capturing Japanese prisoners and contributing to the war effort. So I feel like my life has been intertwined with all this history, and I needed to learn more, and it's taught me a lot. And I'm hoping now to make a contribution through the museum, which is really dedicated to sharing the history, preserving and sharing the history of what happened so that future generations can learn.
To that point, how do you feel, Carolyn, in terms of, do you feel that the United States public is getting more informed about their own history, particularly the history of incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, as well as any other points in American history where you feel we should understand the contributions of Japanese Americans? Where do you think we stand as a people and a country in understanding these contributions?
We're moving slowly. There are now standardized curriculum that are being adopted in some of the states. I see it all the time. We have visitors who come into the museum who routinely will say, I didn't even know any of this happened, because we weren't teaching it until recently. And now there are Asian American studies, Asian American history being introduced. But it's not happening fast enough for me, for any of us, because I look around at what's happening in the world right now, and we are not integrating what we are supposed to be learning, because I don't think that we have done a great job of teaching it. We have a lot of work to do. The evidence that I use that we badly need to increase the amount of education, and then how to interpret it and how to make it work for us in the future, is I often will ask, especially student groups, I'll often ask them, how many of you have had the phrase, "you're the wrong color," tossed at you? You would think that if we start to learn more, as we start to teach and learn and hopefully become a more diverse, understanding, compassionate country, that you won't see that as much. It used to be very blatant, and then some of history is repeating itself. But I asked that question, and with Rose's group of students, there were over 60 of them in the room. And when I asked them that question, I think, Rose, wasn't it about a quarter of the room raised their hands
Yeah.
that they had that? These are seventh graders. These are children who are being young adults who are being told you're the wrong color. There is much more work to be done because this is still happening today.
That was a nice segue to Rose. You partnered, or the museum partnered with Rose Reiken in San Diego at High Tech High, Middle Mesa, correct, Rose?
Correct.
On this project. So Rose, can you just, before we talk about the project, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are as a teacher and what prompted you to get involved with the museum?
As a teacher and as an educator, I view education as a justice space, as one of our greatest ways that we can shift kind of what Carolyn was saying, that if we empower our young people to believe that they can be change makers, to understand our history, to be critical thinkers, then we will create a better world. So that really motivates me in what I teach my kids, and which Carolyn shares, and I'm so grateful for, this deep value in the fact that young people have deeply, deeply meaningful things to contribute to society that many people don't value in the same way. And at High Tech, our major principle is using project-based learning and authentic learning as often as possible. And project-based learning, when fully embraced, is taking an authentic real-world problem and seeing how young people can grapple with that problem and learn all of the standard things about school that they're supposed to learn along the way. And so when developing a project for my seventh graders, I am a Jewish educator, and last year I did a unit on the Holocaust with my students. And this year I was still interested in exploring that time period. I think World War II and all of the dehumanization is a really interesting way for students to kind of grapple with the extreme of what can happen when we other people, but taking it into the American lens of, often I think Japanese incarceration is ignored when teaching about World War II, because America is the bad guy in that story. And our normative society did this terrible thing to this population. So often World War II education focuses on us being the good guy, being the winner, being the people who liberated the concentration camps in Europe. So I was really interested in pushing students to think about this time where our government and our society failed us as a community. We wanted to focus on Japanese incarceration, and I reached out to the museum in San Jose, and very luckily they agreed to collaborate. And we were able to authentically talk to each other about what I thought seventh graders could meaningfully contribute to the museum and what the museum genuinely needed back from us. So we came up with this idea of having the seventh graders revamp the museum's education program and tour program for young people, as Carolyn's put it, which I think is beautiful, having young people bring their expertise as young people, and the docents and historians bring their expertise in that role, and combine them to create these like really meaningful and thoughtful tours that are appropriate for this up and coming generation.
That sounds fantastic. I love the student agency involved in this project, as well as then capitalizing on the experiences of the docents of the Japanese American community. That's fantastic. Oh, and I'll just also add, as you both probably know, I don't think it's ironic that some of those camps were actually liberated by Japanese American soldiers. I think that bears noting, the irony of that, when folks didn't even have full rights back in their own country, liberating the camps. But I digress there. I really want to talk about this project because, like I said, it sounds a phenomenal way to really make learning come alive. Can you, whether it's Carolyn or Rose, Carolyn, what did you hope that the museum got out of this project? And then Rose, what did you hope your students got out of this project?
Well, for me, it was about improving our tours. We do a tremendous number of them for school groups. And each of us as docents, unlike some museums, we don't have a script. And so each of us takes it from our own perspective and works with the students. And I've only been a docent for about a year. And what I was finding was that I wasn't doing anything really different with the students, but I was getting different reactions from students. And so I got very curious. So when Rose called, and I want your audience to know that when Rose called, we didn't know what we were going to be doing. None of us knew. She asked the first critical question, which is there something we can do together? And so we really developed this whole theme on the fly. The other thing, which I think was really remarkable, because I will still remember the day Rose said to me, "This is the first project I've ever done that I did not know what the outcome was going to be." Nobody had done it before. We were novice. And so I had hoped that there's something to be learned here about teaching students, teaching young people. I don't know much about this generation. And for me, the biggest takeaway, I think, was what I learned about today's young people and how much insight they have into how they are. Sometimes they get cast in a very, very bad role of they're selfish, they're greedy, they're self-centered. There's reasons why they appear that way sometimes. And they were very open to talking about it and very insightful.
Carolyn, you mentioned that some of their reactions were surprising to you, that you gave this tour to adults and they had different reactions. What were some of those reactions of students that you found surprising?
The one that stands out is the young man. He was in high school. We did the whole tour. And at the very end, he came over to me and he said, "I know why all this happened." I said, "Oh, good. Why?" He said, "Because old people are stupid." And so he was using his own biases. His own biases were influencing how he was looking at the museum, that we weren't giving enough context for him to go, there's something else that failed here. And they're perfectly capable of understanding that. But how we present it is often, here's what happened. And we need to take it that step further beyond here's what happened and get into some of the detail, get into some of the context and the reasons why, because sometimes the biases will kick in. The other big thing was about suggestions they were making, which were really good. We kept hearing a theme that you need to make this tour more interactive. You need to be more engaging. And I finally said because I was doing weekly office hours with these students in small groups, and I said finally to a couple of the groups, keep hearing this theme of you need to be more engaging. You need to be more interactive. Why do I keep hearing that? And they were very clear. They actually talked about how overloaded they are, inundated they are with sensory overload. It's YouTube, it's social media, it's everything else. We're just bombarded with stimulation. If it's not about me, I tune it out. I took that and went, if it's not about you. So we have to make what they're hearing relevant to how they're living their lives today.
How'd you do that?
Well, I'll let Rose talk about
All right.
ideas that we had.
The most important thing that project-based learning unlocks for students is this authentic audience, that students are so much more motivated to actually learn and engage and dive deeply into things when there's something other than a test or a worksheet or a grade at the end of it. Carolyn mentioned the office hours that she so graciously did for my amazing little 12-year-olds, where every week on Thursdays, we spent an hour for each class with Carolyn and other docents in the museum to at first do education together, to tour the museum, for her to share her story, for other docents to share their stories. But eventually it became this sort of workshop with Carolyn and each of the small groups who was building a tour together, where they could share their ideas and she could give feedback and they could figure out how they could most authentically meet the needs of the museum. As an aside, I think that was truly the most impactful part of the project for students and for me, of watching students, especially students who may be more disruptive in class or may have a harder time focusing, who were locked in when it was their group's time to work with her, knowing this is a real human being who has real stake in what we're saying. And I don't want to embarrass myself. Like, I want to show up and I want to say something valuable and I want to share these amazing ideas that I have. Fascinating to see how much more authentically that they could connect to this difficult and often boring history of World War II. It's not everyone's favorite thing to learn about different battles or how we escalated, how we got to incarceration. It's difficult stuff for 12 and 13-year-olds to grapple with. But when they knew that there was accountability, that there was someone that it would make a difference to if they learned this thing or didn't, it was so much easier for them to engage and to really try to understand what was happening. My goal from the beginning was to have students see not just it was old people and they made a mistake, but that genocide and oppression and dehumanization follow a pattern. There's the same steps that happen every single time that when you're in it may feel unique and different. But when we zoom out historically, in almost every place and every time when there's systematic dehumanization, it follows certain steps. Students should know we have an obligation to share that information, that it's not this random thing that just happens out of nowhere, but that we can catch it at the beginning and try to intervene. My transformative goal for students, that they understand these are the little things that lead to the big thing, that internment doesn't happen in a day, but it starts with how do we dehumanize Japanese Americans to make it so that it feels normal to push them away and out of our society. And collaborating with the museum really helped students see that. They had personal stories that they were hearing of people's families and themselves who went through these camps that made it impossible to not grapple more deeply with what was going on. And their suggestions were everywhere, from what you would imagine a 12-year-old might say of silly things, and deeply, deeply thoughtful and totally usable ideas for the museum. And that is the beauty of middle school, truly. One of our groups created a choose your own adventure style write-up for one of the exhibits in the museum, where students would imagine themselves, back to what Carolyn was saying about relating it back to them and how it's relevant to them. Students would imagine themselves in the camp, and then based on what students had learned, they would think of different options that might have been presented to you. They would say, you arrive to the camp, the soldiers tell you you have to put your stuff in this one pile over here. Do you do it? Yes or no? This is the consequences that could happen if you agree, if you disagree. Rich document of all of the historical knowledge that they've gained, but is so accessible to a 7th through 12th grader of just imagining themselves in this situation and what might have happened along the way. Overall, I think students were able to really pull out some of the amazing things that the museum is already doing, and then highlighting areas where, ooh, if you speak on this, or you make this a little more interactive, or you ask us this question, we might be able to access this information in a more deep and meaningful way than a tour for an older group who might just be able to listen for a longer period of time and absorb the information that way.
Now, after you did this project, and I guess this question is for either Carolyn or Rose, did you see, maybe it's more for Carolyn, did you see a difference in student engagement on your tours after working with Rose's students to redesign these tours for kids?
We're still in the process of redesigning, and what we're going to be doing is doing some training for our docents to get them more aware of what will really resonate with young people. But I know that now when I give tours to students, I immediately started changing a little of what I was doing based on what they were telling me. One of the things they said was, listen, we're the short attention span theater. Don't wait till the end to say, do you have any questions? At each station, ask me if I have any questions, because I forget. And so I immediately implemented that. I find that we're having a lot more dialogue because we've increased the amount of exchange that goes on during the tour itself. It's not just a tour of us showing them something. It's really about get engaged in what happened and make it come alive. And I find that there's a lot more discussion, not interestingly, not only with the students, but with the faculty that are with them to be a little more forthcoming with some of their comments and questions as well.
Rose, this is the first time you've done a project like this with the museum, correct?
Yes.
What would you do the same if you were going to take another group to the Japanese American Museum of San Jose? And what would you change if you could change anything?
Carol and I have actually discussed this because we are excited for year 2 of this project next year. We're already buzzing with ideas about what we might do next. The most impactful piece was definitely this authentic connection of having a partner that is genuinely has a need that we can fill or that we can support is transformational to student learning. In future partnerships with us and for advice for other teachers too, having a community partner where it's not, here's my idea, I just need someone to host my idea or to hang up the thing that my students made, is to present groups who have an authentic need or say, like we did, what do you think we can collaborate on? What do you think actually needs to exist in this space? Finding that real problem for students to grapple with is the thing I'm most thinking about and taking away. I think students can sniff it out if it's real or if it's not. If there's a real purpose to it, it's very obvious to them. And if it's manufactured, it's also very obvious. So that is something I'm excited to continue with the museum and my students to figure out what is the next problem or set of things that we want to grapple with. Something we're considering changing or shifting for next year, especially now that we have a year of this under our belts, a little more expertise. Here, all of my students made a pitch deck to the museum of here is our highlights, here's our suggestions, here's an activity we think you can do, here's our feedback. But all of the students produced the same structure of the thing and gave feedback on these tours. Next year, I think the dream is that we can create a menu of options for students that meet different authentic needs for the museum. So maybe we don't need 60 students to give feedback on the letters that the museum is working on interpreting or things like that. Or maybe we don't need 60 students to do X, Y, and Z, but maybe we need 10 students to do that and 10 students to do something else, etc. So that then we can make even more progress and do even more niche, interesting things. But even more importantly, maybe from my perspective, I can give students more authentic choice of what is something that is a real problem for the museum that you are genuinely interested in grappling with. And then they have more investment in this is the thing that I sought out, and this is the thing that I think I'm uniquely good at or skilled at addressing for them. So that feels like the hope for the next attempt at this.
Rose, did you actually assess your students in this project?
It was definitely a part of their grade with a high-tech and project-based learning. All of our learning is project-based, so their entire grade is based off of these projects rather than units in a more like traditional school. This was what we studied from January until March, so from like winter break to spring break. Their grade and our class time had a lot of different things. There was some like more traditional, I have knowledge that I'm going to share with you about Japanese American history and about incarceration and things like that. But as much as possible, I tried to have members of the Japanese American community and experts in the field share that content with them instead of me. We collaborated with the museum, of course, and then we also did a field trip with the Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego, and they heard from survivors there. All of that was assessed in a lot of different ways. Office hours were an awesome weekly assessment and check-in where I got to listen to a lot of what they were sharing. And you can't really do the task without knowing the history behind it. And so as they were having conversations, they would bring up, oh, we learned this thing. And when we were reading this book, we figured out this thing. And that's what we want to talk about in the tour. It's a lot of consistent assessment that because project-based learning is so interactive, it was so clear to me by the end that they had understood what was going on without having to do a big test or something like that at the end. For grades, they were assessed in the normal way of like you turn in the worksheet, you get the score, whatever it is. But then pitch decks at the end were their big final product that were content heavy and English heavy of using their writing skills and persuasive writing.
Thank you for that. And Carolyn, these office hours that you led with students, did other docents participate in office hours?
Yes, we've tried it a couple of ways. One was to have both of us in this with the whole group. Then there was the smaller groups. We broke them into smaller groups. Each one of us would take some of the groups and just meet with them and give them feedback on their ideas. But I have to say the key to the office hours was Rose. All I had to do was sit there in front of the screen and talk to them. Behind the scenes, making sure that the groups of 3 and 4 students at a time were rotating in front of the computers, making sure that everything was working and that we could all hear and see each other. I don't know how she did it. I can't say enough about Rose. She's the coolest cookie I've ever seen. And such respect for her students that they listen. When she talks, they listen. And I saw them blossoming with these ideas, with this ability to think outside the box, as they say. I actually have to share that my opinion of our future holds for us was not entirely positive before this project, but I look at these young people and I know if we give them the right tools, they can do it. They can lead us. But we're going to also, which is why one of the things that we've been talking about is I'd like the next project to be one that helps develop their leadership skills. That I think if we give them the right tools, we will have the kind of leadership that we so badly need right now.
Rose, what would you recommend a teacher do? How'd you start this project? Like, where did you begin?
Great question. I can't get a compliment like that and not return the favor. So you first just have to also, you can tell Carolyn and I have a deep love for one another. Give her a shout out that as much of this project may not have happened without me, it absolutely would not have happened without Carolyn. She really was so dedicated to meeting with these students 2 hours every Thursday. So many times of the two of us meeting, with the director of the museum meeting. And it's so rare, I feel, to find fellow adults who have the respect and reverence for young people that Carolyn does, of knowing and valuing that they are experts in and of themselves and they have something really valuable to share, that the kids just adored her. And she flew down to San Diego to see their big exhibition at the end, and the kids were like swarming her and were so excited to meet her and give her a tour of the school. But that connects to what gives me a lot of joy in this. The beauty of middle school is that they're becoming young adults and they have real ideas about how the world should be. And they so desperately want someone to listen to them and want to be valued as contributors to society. And the reward of saying, I am someone who values what you have to say in a really authentic and real way, is so high, and arguably higher than in high school, when students start to have more confidence that what they have to say does matter. And of course, you're going to listen to me. I'm the most important person ever. I've found that being someone who says, I understand that what you have to say is genuinely valuable and genuinely serves a purpose in society. And the problems that you're dealing with are also genuinely big and genuinely matter. Goes far in creating a classroom culture that is fun and nice to be around and allows me to keep having that excitement. I feel like having the perspective of valuing students for wherever they are in life, that their problems matter, that their thoughts matter, leads to really joyous moments where kids trust you and where you can have silliness and weirdness and have the serious moments of, we are going to grapple with Japanese incarceration together. And so my advice to new teachers of keeping that joy is establishing a culture where that feels true. And as often as possible, that authentic learning is transformational. Of a lot of the behavior issues, and even the most difficult kid clocks in and is ready when there's someone who genuinely is existing in the world and needs to hear their perspective.
How did you get this project off the ground?
Luckily, at High Tech, I do have a lot of support from our administration and from the school in creating something like this. My director and dean have a lot of resources of how to build something like that. But I think it starts with backwards design, thinking about what is the transformational idea that I want students to walk away from, or the authentic need that I need students to address? So whichever one comes first is the basis. For me, it was this transformational idea that genocide and oppression and dehumanization follows this pattern, and for students to understand that. And once we have that, then work back from there of, okay, who could be an authentic audience for that problem? Let me reach out to the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. And from there, we came up with tours. And then it gets easier and easier. Once I have the final product, let's work backwards. What skills are they going to need to create that product? What people are they going to need to meet in order to do that successfully? What historical content, what English content, what are they going to need to know? And then it becomes normal teaching and normal calendaring of, all right, here's the stuff that's on my list. Let's figure out what's going to happen. And we started with a fun launch to get them invested, where they got to meet Carolyn and the museum team and do a tour. And she pitched a PowerPoint about what the problem was that they were going to solve. And then we kind of jumped into that.
Switching gears slightly, Carolyn, what's going on at the museum now that you want to share?
Well, we are continuing the work. We are actually in the process of talking about how do we want to take this project and publicize it, reach out to some of the local school districts and let them know what we've done. We also have a number of things going on. We're about to open our newest exhibit, which will be sharing of our oral histories project. We want to capture the stories of people who are not going to be with us too much longer. We are talking about having a future exhibit that will focus on athletics, sports, and how important sports were to the people who were incarcerated. We're always open and looking for what should we be doing next. And big thing for me right now is as we move forward and think about next year's class, what else can we do now that we've had this amount of learning about this project? How do we take it to the next step?
Before we conclude, is there anything we haven't talked about?
I actually do have. The one thing that I don't know that we really touched on is this is not just a story about the Japanese American history and how we forward it. This is all of our story. I often ask groups who come into the museum, how many of you had family who came to America for a better life? We are such a diverse country, and America is an aggregate of all of our stories and all of our backgrounds and all of our various groupings. And so this isn't about one group. This is all of us.
Rose, how about you?
Building on that, as a history teacher, having the opportunity to shift the larger narrative about American history to be more honest about who we are as a nation. We tend to standardize in the curriculum the history that paints us in a better light. And so as often as possible, for history teachers to center these stories of being honest in our history, of being honest in how dominant society in America has treated people, to encourage and help our students kind of grapple with the dark times of our history and not push it away.
Ladies, where can people find out more about you and the work that you do? We'll start with Rose and then we'll go with Carolyn.
I am at High Tech High. You can check us out on our website. I'm at Middle Mesa. And yeah, you can learn more about the work that we do over there.
And for the museum, go to jamsj.org and you'll be able to see what the museum is up to and what our current exhibits are and some history.
Thank you both very much for participating today. I really appreciated our conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.